Good morning, everybody. It's Ben Thompson here, the CEO of Employment Hero. We've got a couple of additional people on the call today and a cameo from Simon OB. So if Shane and Simon, if you just want to turn your cameras on. So if I can introduce everybody, Simon OB is the head of EI Legal. He's a very experienced employment lawyer and is going to be answering our questions around a whole bunch of very interesting issues that we're all dealing with at the moment. And Shane is the CEO of Employment Innovations, decades of experience in managing HR and complex legal issues and employment issues. So welcome both to the panel today.
Thanks, Ben. Thanks for having us back for another.
Thanks, Ben.
No worries. Look, everybody, today, as previously, we're all dealing with the same issues at the same time. We all had to deal with COVID and the peak of the crisis, and now we're at a stage where people are starting to get back to work. People are approaching it differently. It raises all sorts of different issues, from psychology to employment law and logistics. How to get more than two people in a lift. And we just wanted to spend today answering your questions and getting you involved as much as possible. So I would encourage everybody on the call today to participate via the chats. You can also raise your hand. There's a function in the bottom of the Zoom screen where I think you can raise your hand, and if you are willing, you can talk live to the participants on the call. So yeah, please participate as much as possible. We have a number of polls as well that are pre-prepared, and we'll drop those in throughout the discussion. It's really interesting to see how people are approaching different things. So we'll look at those polls. But I wanted to kick off firstly before we get into the actual return to work. There was a big legal case yesterday, and it's in all of the papers today. So I wanted Simon to sort of talk to us about that legal case. It isn't directly relevant to returning to work, but for every employer out there who has casuals or is considering employing casuals, it may have an impact. So Simon, can you sort of separate the wheat from the chaff on that issue?
Yeah, of course. Thanks, Ben, and good morning, everyone. So yeah, there was a case handed down yesterday called Workpack and Rosato, and you might recall that a couple of years ago there was a big case called Workpack and Skeen, and both the cases concern the same employer who runs a mine site or mine sites, and this latest case is I guess the latest in a line of decisions which highlights the risks for employers of engaging casual employees in the way that they're not really designed to be engaged. And what this case confirms is that if you engage someone as a casual, notwithstanding that they might have signed a casual employment agreement, notwithstanding the fact that you might be paying them a casual loading, if you treat them as a permanent employee, then they are going to be entitled to permanent employee benefits such as redundancy, such as paid annual leave and paid sick leave, and all of those sorts of trappings. And so the danger for employers is getting that wrong, engaging someone for a long time, sometimes as a casual, and then finding at the end of it that despite the fact that you've paid them this casual loading and had an agreement with them that they are a casual, that you're then obliged to back pay all these benefits. Now, as Ben said, this is across the news today and yesterday, and it's getting a lot of coverage. I think the effect of the case shouldn't be overstated. The circumstances of Mr. Rosato's employment he was a drive-in, drive-out worker. So he worked 7 days on in a mine and then 7 days off as a driver. And he was also given his rosters for up to 7 months in advance. So he was told, here's your rosters for the next 7 months. These are the weeks you're working on the mine. These are the weeks you're having off. Now, one of the pointers of a true casual relationship is that the employees don't have a firm commitment to work. They don't have a guarantee of future work. But looking at Mr. Rosato's situation, obviously he was given a roster for 7 months in advance. He was living on a mine site for 7 days at a time. So really, there's no question that there was a guarantee of future work for him. When he was on the mine, he was stuck there for 7 days, and as I say, he was working to a 7 month roster. So this shouldn't be read to mean that if you are engaging casuals on the proper basis that you are going to come unstuck. But it does highlight the importance of making sure, if you are engaging casuals, that they are a truly casual engagement. They shouldn't have a long period of guaranteed work, and they shouldn't have regular hours every week if possible. But the last thing I would say about the case is, you may recall from the work pack and scheme case, as a result of that, there were some regulations brought in by the government quite quickly to prevent casual double dipping. So if you paid a casual employee a casual loading and they were later found to be a permanent employee, there's some legislation which says you can offset the casual loading you paid against the permanent employee entitlements. In this latest Rosato case, the employer wasn't successful in using those regulations for some sort of technical reasons, but the law is out there to assist you in that respect. But it requires you to do some things in advance. It requires you to have sort of some specific clauses in your employment contract to avail yourself of those benefits. Obviously, the template contracts in Employment Hero and the ones that Employment Innovations provides to its clients have been drafted to give those protections. But it is a good time as any following this case to make sure your contracts for your casuals are in the correct format, and just to review your arrangements with your staff if you have concerns about whether you are engaging a casual on a regular basis or giving them commitment of shifts in advance, and you need some advice about that, of course, get in contact with us and we'd be delighted to help.
Great, thank you. So yeah, big headline, but probably not relevant to 99.99% of employers out there, I'd say.
Yeah, I think as long as those 99.9 employers are taking sensible steps with how they engage their casuals, I think you're right.
And just one, because we could spend a long time on this, but just one last question. Why did the court decide that even though somebody had been paid a 25% casual loading, which is supposed to accommodate or substitute the paid annual leave and paid sick leave, etc., why did the court decide that they still have to pay over and above the loading? Do you know?
I do, and it's not a quick answer, but I'll do it as quickly as I can. In Mr. Rosato's case, what he was claiming for was he was a casual employee, but he'd been given periods of annual leave off, and he'd been given periods of sick leave off, and his claim was that he needed to be paid now for those unpaid periods which he'd had off. The regulations don't protect a situation like that. They protect double dipping where an employee hasn't been given a form of leave and has been paid a loading instead. which is slightly different, or at least the court found that was slightly different to a situation where someone has been given leave, they just haven't been paid for it. So it's a bit of a technical technical point.
Okay, cool. There's a couple of questions coming in here, and then after I'll try and consolidate them, and then we'll move on to the return to work stuff. But great, Elizabeth, Tanya, Daniel, great to have you submitting questions. Everybody else, get those questions lined up. So the sort of general consideration here is, if somebody is casual and they've been working reasonably regular rosters and hours for a period of 6 months or 12 months, depending on the award or the conditions, and you offer them a switch to permanent, but they decline that, is that sufficient to protect you as an employer?
I think it's a very, very good point in your favour. If you've been engaging someone on regular shifts, you ask them whether they want to be permanent, and they say no. That's a big tick in the box which says they're not a permanent employee. Is it a silver bullet? Will it work in all situations? No, I don't think so. But it's a big thing you can do to protect yourself.
Cool. All right. Thank you, Simon. You're a font of knowledge. Let's move into getting everyone back to work. And I think it's worth stating that as an economy, as a country, we have to get people back to work. This coronavirus is costing lives, but it's also costing hundreds of billions of dollars, $210 billion, I think, so far, committed to JobKeeper and other initiatives. And the government have been pretty clear that we have to get back to work. Kids are back at school this week in New South Wales, or next week in New South Wales. So let me just throw out the first poll, and while I do that, hand over to Shane to ask you, Shane, what do you think are some of the major considerations on getting people back to work? Yeah, and Shane, also, if you see any questions in the chat or in the Q&A, feel free to jump in and address some of those as well.
Yeah, just for the questions, just trying to obviously jump in between chat and Q&A. Are we going to keep them to one forum, or try and rattle with both? We'll just do our best. Just
do your best.
Okay. All right. Look, as we know, with the last couple of months, the pandemic has affected different industries in many different ways. For many, they've been able to adapt to a remote working environment, and for many, it's worked really well for a lot of businesses out there. We'll talk a bit about today about businesses that have moved to that remote work environment, and whether they are considering right now talking about the merits of coming back to the workplace, or we're considering a hybrid model, or maybe continuing the remote work into the future. It's also, this is relevant to businesses that have not been able to continue their normal workplace due to the restrictions, and with the 3-step process in play, and different states adopting their own timelines to bring people back to work and to allow the economy to start moving again. This is a pertinent discussion around how you can do that safely. So we'll be certainly talking a bit about how you go through putting together a COVID safe plan so that you can confidently get people back to work and manage those risks at the same time.
Cool. So just while you were talking there, Shane, we had that poll come back. On the call today, there's 200, nearly 300 people. 71% of them are already back at work or getting back to work. 13% aren't yet, and 17% are sort of sitting on the fence. As you mentioned, it's different industries, so we didn't ask there. Have you been working remotely? And probably could have been a bit clearer on, are you going back to the workplace as opposed to are you going back, continuing to do work? But vast majority of people, getting back into it, which is great. Sorry, Shane, did you want to keep going?
I want to get stuck into it now around the considerations. I mean, for people that are there on the fence or or are starting to think about that return to work. I suppose, where do we start? So if we talk about, I mean, we've been living and breathing these examples ourselves, and we're certainly employment innovations at the moment are going through the steps to look and explore what that looks like for us about going back to the physical workplace. Well, we've been lucky; we've been able to adapt fairly well, but in some situations, we feel that that physical workplace just can't be replicated. So we're going through some steps at the moment around that. Now, ultimately, what the considerations for business that are sitting on the fence or considering return to physical workplace is, there's obviously a wealth of employees that have indicated they do enjoy the flexibility that comes with working from home. I think we saw that Employment Hero did a survey in the last couple of weeks of over 1,200 workers, which indicated more than 2/3 were more than happy to either continue working remotely or a partially remote work moving forward into the future. So that shows the sentiment is there for employees to continue with an element of flexibility.
Yeah, sorry, just if I jump in there, 64.5%. And Julia, if you can share the results of that survey, I just thought that was incredibly interesting. We ended up with, of our own employees in Employment Hero, we had 54% saying that they wanted to continue working from home on a permanent or semi-permanent basis. But when we asked, the general population out there, and we had a decent sample size, 1,250 people, and we came back at 64.5% of people want to continue working on a permanent or semi-permanent basis remotely. So huge number, but yeah, Julia's just dropped that survey white paper into the chat. So check it out after the call or while you're sitting here. Sorry, Shane, I keep interrupting you.
No, you're right. Go away. So you can keep interrupting me as you need to. And is there any questions that have popped up that we want to jump on quickly?
Yeah, there's a bunch of questions. Someone just asked for the results of the survey. So Ruth, they are in the chat.
Just mixing up with a few casual questions.
Yeah, which is all right when we've still got Simon on the line. We were about to offer a regular casual permanent work. However, with COVID-19, we're reluctant to do so. What should we do? Well, don't. If you don't have to, if you're reluctant and you can't commit to permanent employment, then maybe stay casual, or depends on your own circumstances.
We might. There's a lot of really good questions in here. I think some of them might require some more detail to give a really good answer. We'll keep moving forward, I suppose, and then I'll get a chance in when you're talking a bit later, jump on and start looking at some of these. I guess we're at the point where we're discussing the pros and cons of remote versus the physical workplace, and I suppose now we've a lot of individuals and employees have realised those benefits, as has been shown in the survey results that Ben spoke about. Similarly, I think those numbers reflect what our business and our employees are feeling as well, which is consistent with that. I guess you've got to then balance those benefits you see that from an employee perspective and employee experience and all the benefits come with that, with what's important for the business. And I think considerations that need to be taken into account right now, obviously productivity is a key point. Some roles are just not as productive, or some individuals are just not as productive in that remote working environment as others. Some roles require a bit more supervision than others, and that's obviously makes it very difficult when we're remote. There's certainly challenges around informal learning development. Just being surrounded by sound bites in your daily work, being able to bounce ideas off each other and learn on the job is a lot difficult when remote. And I think there's obviously also limited opportunity for brainstorming, problem solving, and innovation, just those stand-up opportunities you get just to bounce ideas and try and problem solve. So there's some key considerations for businesses that are thinking about, yes, there are employee benefits here, but we've really got to think about some bigger picture items as well and get that balance right.
So can I just jump in there, Shane? So we, I think, related businesses, Employment Innovations and Employment Hero, but we're probably taking a bit of a different approach to how we get back to work. We've we're currently looking at becoming a remote first workplace. And I think what we looked at this and said, okay, well, a lot of employees want to continue working from home permanently. Can we accommodate it? Yeah, of course we can. They're highly productive. We've got a good platform to manage them with. There's no reason that they can't do that. But then it raises another question, which is how do you keep the workplace culture, in a way that, as positive as possible when some people just aren't going to be at work very, very often. And that is and the way you've got two choices really. Either you're an office based with remote being a sort of second place, or you're remote first and the office is the second place. And in looking at how businesses are switching to remote first, the number one, there's sort of two major principles. We've got 10 in our policy, but the two major principles that I'm seeing are, number one, everything that you have to do has to be capable of doing remotely. So there's a whole bunch of things that you mentioned, like brainstorming and collaboration, where you said you can't do them unless you're face to face. We would argue that you have to be able to do them remotely, or you can't be a remote employer, remote first employer. So we're trying to solve for so many different issues around keeping that fair. And the second, so how do you solve and deliver all the work that needs to be done remotely is a big question. And the second question is, how do you keep everybody fairly or treat everybody fairly and equally when people are working from different locations? And the position there is that if somebody is online, if somebody has to dial into a meeting, then everybody has to dial into the meeting. And that one statement sort of makes people shake their head. But unless you take that position, you're not treating people equally. You would be treating that person who can't physically be at work as who's the only person dialing in. They will have all sorts of difficulties involving themselves in that meeting. So you really have to start to ask, what does a remote first workplace look like? And are we prepared to commit to that? And also, if you're not, then how are you going to deal with that issue of some people feeling excluded from meetings when they can't physically be there? So lots of issues coming out of that. And lots of stuff that we can start to share as we sort of go down this path of switching to a remote first workplace. You're saying that you want to have I think we would call it a blended workplace, some roles working from home.
Yeah, obviously it's a question of effectiveness more than anything else. Some things can be done remotely. It's just a question of how effective, and comparing that to say a physical situation. Obviously, it's an important thing not to be quick to dismiss ideas, because there are certainly ways to improve the way remote work is done. Certainly in the last couple of months, we've even seen that some things that we thought weren't as effective, even meetings, have become much more effective as we've come used to the etiquette around using Zoom and other tools in the workplace. They've become much more collaborative, and people have been, those meetings effectiveness has certainly improved. So I guess it's important not to dismiss it quickly, and to try and find those innovations and ideas to make it work better. So, but I think it's just really collating a list of pros and cons and working out what is going to work best for your business. There might be an organizational approach. There also might be role-specific approaches that are necessary, but it is not an easy one to answer. Every workplace, every role, every individual is different.
Yeah. There's a few questions here in the chat, or there's a statement from Angus who says, sorry, who was that? No. Kernow, as a director of a design and innovation company, I can confidently say that you can brainstorm well remotely. It just requires consideration and a deliberate setup. And Angus has got two questions, which we might sort of switch to. Should an employer have a working from home, remote working policy, including workplace health and safety considerations? Any thoughts on handling fairness of remote working across different roles? Some folks would need to be in the workplace more than others. So in terms of let's start with the policy. and Simon, feel free to weigh in on the fairness part as well. Can you see any legal issues in employees being treated very differently depending on whether they're office bound or remote?
Yeah, I mean, I think it's really good questions. I think the first question about having policies and procedures in place to deal with health and safety issues, if people are working remotely or from home, I mean, absolutely, you need to have that in place, and perhaps even more so than you would in a physical physical office environment, because you're going to have a lot less control over how people are performing their duties. So I think it is important to have policies in place to educate staff about safe ways of working, be that, you know, how they set up their home office to avoid kind of, you know, injuries, how they safeguard themselves and business property from, you know, security risks, all those sorts of things. I think you do need that in place. And of course, it's perhaps it's not an obvious point, but as an employer, you have a duty to provide a safe place of work to employees wherever they're doing their work, be that from at your premises or from home. So, you know, you don't escape those obligations because someone isn't at the premises, although, of course, the law recognises that you would have less control over how work is done. But yeah, it's fundamental to have those policies and procedures in place, and I think both Employment Innovations and Employment Hero have those documents to assist employers. The second question about fairness between employees, you know, how you decide whether someone can work from home or whether they can't, and how you sort of divvy that up. I think as sort of Shane was mentioning earlier, it does come down to sort of questions of efficiencies and productivity, and I don't think there would be anything wrong with an employer saying we have some roles which have to be done in the office or in the premises, and some roles which don't, because, you know, there will be some roles which you know, need to be performed on your premises. Perhaps they involve a certain piece of equipment or the like, would be the obvious example. So I don't think there would be an issue if you divided up the roles based on the role. I suppose it becomes more tricky where you have a number of people performing the same role, and if you wanted to say to person A, well, yes, you're okay to work from home, and person B, no, you're not, that could be more difficult. But if those decisions are based on sort of non-discriminatory factors, i.e., you know, we've noticed person A is more productive at home and person B's productivity drops off whenever they work from home, I think it would be reasonable for an employer to make decisions based on those grounds. So I think as long as there's a sort of rational, reasonable reasoning behind it, I don't think employers have their hands tied to treat everyone exactly the same. Yeah.
Now, I've posted, while you were speaking there, Simon, a great response. I've posted another poll. Now, I realise that with hindsight, there probably should have been one other option there, which is no, I'm not planning on making any roles remote. Any current, you know, like the roles that existed that were office bound beforehand, are you planning on making them remote? If anyone, just so I can get an idea, if anyone isn't planning on making any roles remote, can you post that into the chat? To say, no, we're planning on all back to the office? Or if you're in an industry where you just have to be, just let us know, because we're getting a good response here. But I'll end the poll now and share the answers, if you can see that. 33% of respondents are saying that between 1 and 5% of their roles will be remote. Again, they may have clicked that because none of them were. But 18%, 5 to 10% of remote roles, 17%, 10 to 30% of roles will be remote. 22% of people here say that 30 to 50% of their roles will be remote, and 10%, 50 to 100. So, save for the error in not having, 0 in as a response there is a significant number of people planning on continuing to provide remote work. Gartner ran a poll of, I think it was about 300 CFOs that they interviewed and surveyed globally. And they found that 74% of those CFOs said that they were planning on having at least 5% of their roles made remote. So more employers, on that poll anyway, more employers saying that they plan on making roles remote going forward than employees even saying that they would like to continue. So there's huge demand for this remote working environment. And that in itself is going to, throw out all sorts of issues, some of which we've already said. Are you remote first or office first, and how do you deal with the difference? But yeah, really interesting to see. Shane, while I've been speaking and Simon's been speaking, I'm hoping that you've had a chance to look at some of those questions.
Yep. There's a lot of coming through just from people's own situations, what they're talking about around what they're looking to do, which has been great to read. The different things that people are putting in place and what's working for them. A lot of people commenting that they will be now implementing the return to the office. There's a few questions coming in there about dealing with employees who will refuse to come into the office for various reasons. I will park that because I think it's best to do that one at the end once we've covered off the safe work practices first, and then we'll talk about how to deal with situations around that. So we'll park that one. There's a few questions in there about now how do we making remote work better. A few questions about different productivity tools that people are recommending. So if anyone's got any, there's a question there about what sort of collaboration tools around brainstorming businesses are using to make that really work. So if anyone's got any good suggestions there, they can.
Yeah, I saw that. I saw that somebody saying, when we're in the office, we use a whiteboard, but any suggestions? Yeah, look, Zoom and Slack, I'm presuming Teams. I don't use Teams much, but almost all of the video conferencing tools have a virtual whiteboard. You draw on the screen and open a separate page up where you can whiteboard with people. So I find that, there's plenty of things built into what we have to enable that collaboration online.
Questions about when you've got staff working from home, is there an obligation to pay for the wireless internet, electricity, or things they have? No, not specifically. Obviously, there are personal tax benefits. I'm not going to get too much into that, but there are personal tax that they can deal with around having a home office. Obviously, some businesses might extend some benefits to employees in that area as well. We've got, we'll keep moving forward. We spent some of the time reading. So I suppose, just summing up the whole work from home and physical office, it's going to be a really interesting discussion and debate, I imagine, around every leadership table in businesses across Australia around what's going to work for them. And then obviously once you've made that decision around what's right for your business, it's then up to employees to sort of work within that framework. And that might mean that they make some personal choices around their own, what works for them within that framework of what's required for the business and their role. So that's sort of, do we want to now jump into, I guess, when returning to the work, what sort of steps you make around safety?
Yeah, just before we do that, Julia, can you, because a number of people in the chat did say that they are planning on all roles coming back to the office. Jules, do you mind just running that poll again with that question in there? If you can just add that a question, and then I'll run the poll again, just so that we can get some actual stats on who it is, because I think that number, that first poll, might be a fair way out if we asked it the right way. And otherwise,
a lot of these questions are related to some personal situations with employees around their situation. So I think we can get to those once we've spoken a bit about the safe work environment, because then you can tackle those questions confidently.
Yeah, I guess, and just one other point I'd make on some of these people reflecting on bringing some people back to the office and others not. Somebody said, all roles will have the option of working from home. This is Jenny. Everyone will be expected to be in the office at least one day a week. Just something to consider there, Jenny, and anyone else sort of dealing with that hybrid scenario, is the frequency that you require people to get to the office is going to dictate the scope of the talent pool that you can access on a remote basis. If it's one, we've looked at this and said, if everyone has to come in one day a week, they pretty much need to live within a 5-hour commute of the office. If it was once a month, they could probably live, in New Zealand or in Bali. If it's once a quarter, they could live just about anywhere on the planet and on you go. But determining the cadence of having regular meetings on site really changes that talent pool that you can access. And we had an example yesterday. Like, we made this decision to become remote first, and we advertised a role for a payroll implementations person. Thank you, Jules. I'll run that now. And advertised a role for a payroll implementation specialist. Somebody applied from Adelaide, and they've started to, they're starting now. So just bear in mind how big you can, how broadly you can recruit people if you need them to be in the office frequently. But yeah, back to you, Shane.
No, certainly. I think it's a really interesting period we're moving into, where that talent pool can be as wide as you really want it to be if you can make this work. So, and as we've seen as well, once you do that, when you can make it work, you've then got a highly engaged employee that makes retention very good. And obviously, when you've got remote workers that are working to sort of key metrics with an engaged worker like that, you can hopefully see those key performance metrics improve. So it's a really exciting period in regards to that, I think, for many businesses. So for many here, there's obviously a high number of businesses that are making those plans to get back into the physical workplace. And I suppose now that we are considering this, there are a number of things you need to do in order for that to be done safely. The government have put forward their 3-step plan towards getting businesses productive and opening again. They've also they've got Safe Work Australia, who has put out a number of different materials to help employers put together what's the so-called COVID safe plan for each business. It will be a requirement for every business that is having to manage COVID risks to put together a plan of this nature. It's important for a number of reasons, and we'll sort of talk through the steps that are involved in that. And once again, that they are going to be different for every business, different industries around how they manage those particular COVID risks. Safe Work Australia's got they've really rattled together and got the materials up there quite quickly. There's also every state and territory Safe Work Authority has got similar materials. At the end of the day, the themes are the same. The general risks are there for most businesses, and those are specifically maintaining the social physical distancing in the workplace so far as reasonably practicable. That means that for many businesses that are looking to return to work, they will need to implement systems of work to allow for that distancing to happen in the workplace. So there's at least 1.5 metres between workstations, and the square meterage rules are in play as well as a strong recommendation. Now, obviously, some tasks and some workplaces will struggle to be able to adapt to that sort of measure, and that's completely fine. I mean, they are recommended measures. If you can't meet that, you've then got to consider other controls that might be worthwhile, such as personal protective equipment and screens and things like that. So you would use a number of different controls to manage the risks around that. Apart from physical and social distancing, you've also got hygiene and cleaning, which is obviously going to be important around where you position that in the workplace and what you commit to there. So the other considerations in developing this plan will be more around business continuity. You've got a situation where if you've got a number of critical roles that have to be performed in the workplace, then have a think about what might happen if one of those employees was to contract coronavirus, and what that might mean for your business. So have a really hard think, because some businesses are adopting creating 2 pools of workers for each role, and this is particularly important, say in hospitality, retail, and other sort of customer facing roles. You create 2 pools of workforce for each role where you can, which means that if there is an outbreak or an issue with one particular employee, and that requires isolation for those that have been in contact with that employee, then at least half your workforce can still get there to ensure the business can continue rolling forward. So you need to think about that as well in your plan. Other considerations might be going back to the social distancing rule. If your workplace can't sort of cater for that, you might be also be rostering so that certain groups can come in on certain days to allow for distancing to occur in the workplace there as well. So there's a number of different things. If you go through the Safe Work Australia guidelines, you'll be able to sort of develop a plan that's good for your business. Importantly as well, with anything safety related, is an obligation to consult with your workforce about what you're planning to put in place, and obviously canvassing the views of those employees in regards to the plan. And that's a really important step with anything you do for safety. So that's also really important.
So Jane, just while you pause for a moment, I'll just mention the results of that poll with the option of saying no. Still 65% of businesses on the call, or people representing businesses on the call, say that they are planning on making some of the roles remote, which is phenomenal. If that 65% of companies are going to be going through that transition to managing a blended workforce. And Simon, as a lawyer, as an employment lawyer, I just think that statistic, 65% of companies moving towards a blended workforce. Think of all of the complexity and new issues that's going to throw out. It's going to be really interesting to see how people deal with that. And as I say, we're dealing with it in real time. Sorry, Shane, did you want to go on?
Yeah, I'll just finish on that safe work, and then I'll get to some of these questions that sort of around employees that are sort of maybe refusing then to come to work and the like. When developing your COVID safe plan or making some decisions around return to work, it's obviously a consideration for the business around how people get to and from work. It's not a conclusive decision that you make, but certainly it's a consideration around whether you think it's safe or not for people to return to work is a general discussion around how they're going to get there. At the end of the day, though, it's not something that you as an employer can control, different people's ways of getting to and from work. Your priority really should be around making that decision, first of all, whether you are going to return to work and for the right reasons, balancing that with the risks that are out there around getting to work. Making sure you've got a safe work, a COVID safe plan for the workplace environment. That might also extend to capturing some work from home features as well. If it's a part of your COVID safe plan that people can work from home, you might capture that in there as well. But importantly, once you've done that, it then really becomes, you've gone through the right process to get that plan in place around consultation, and you've made the right decisions, you've referred to the right documents to get it all done. If you've then got individuals that are saying, look, no, I'm still not comfortable coming to work, you then have to deal with them on an individual basis around why they're saying that. Obviously, it is an anxious period, and people will have anxiety and stress in relation to this, and you will have to manage those risks in consideration to what's been played here. But at the end of the day, it is an employee's responsibility to get to work in whatever way possible. If they're a vulnerable worker, or they have certain medical conditions, or maybe carers or family responsibilities, yes, there is always an obligation for an employer here to try and make reasonable accommodations, as you always would with any of those things, to allow them to continue to work. But at the end of the day, there may well be some tough discussions amongst all of this in consideration of these factors. And it's going to be very interesting how it plays out really on that point, because we've seen a lot of people already making observations around some employees who just are refusing to come in. And I think there's going to be some interesting discussions and possible fallouts from those examples.
Yeah, and maybe Simon, let's just jump straight into that. It's something I've seen mentioned in different webinars and different chats. I've had people ask when they've mentioned to their employees that they need to come back to work. They've had some people refuse on the basis that they don't feel the office or the commute is a safe environment. Where do employers stand if they hit that issue?
Yeah, I think it is tough. It's a tough situation to deal with, but I think, as Shane said, in terms of getting to work, employees have a duty to present at work when they're supposed to, and absent the government putting out some guidelines which says people shouldn't use public transport or something like that, I think an employer, if it comes to it, can be strict and say, look, we need you to come to our premises to perform your work. Obviously, as Shane says, you will try and look at all the other options before taking such a strict approach. If working from home is available, then that will be considered. Can you structure start and finish times so people aren't coming in at the busiest peak hour traffic, etc., for public transport? But I think at the end of the day, unless an employee has got some special reason which means they couldn't travel to work, for example, a medical condition that they could sort of demonstrate through a medical report, I think an employer can be strict on those things. And I think equally in the work environment, as long as you have put sensible systems in place, can screens go up if employees have to work close together, or can people be separated? Can you provide masks and hand sanitizer and all the rest of it? If you've assessed the risk and you've taken what reasonable steps you can to deal with those risks, then I think the situation's the same. An employer probably has quite a strong ability to require people to attend work, unless there is, as I say, a special reason. They have a medical condition which means that it's not going to be possible for them to work in those environments. But I think I think that's not to say that these are going to be kind of easy conversations to have and to kind of skirt around that. But I know it's going to be difficult, but I think that's it. And if an employee continued to refuse in the face of being told, you need to come to work, ultimately, I guess you treat that as a disciplinary issue.
Great. Now, there's been a couple of questions about displaying, do you need to have a COVID return to work policy displayed? How to manage that. And Julia's done a great job posting in chat a link to Employment Heroes return to work bundle. We've put that together because we really, as I said at the outset, everyone's dealing with this at the same time. So those common things that people are asking for, we've thrown into that bundle. A return to workplace health and safety for COVID-19 return to work document. How to handle COVID-19 incident in the workplace document. Workplace planning and logistics. Rapid hiring and onboarding, managing employee engagement, etc., etc. Welcome back letter. The team have tried to put everything in there. If you need more, then let us know. But we've tried to put a robust package together for you. So feel free to download that. Heather asked, and related to that, Heather asked, does every business, i.e. office space only, require a physical COVID return to work plan to be on display in order to open?
Well, I think it's certainly there needs to have been a risk assessment carried out, and I suppose if you're using a plan to manage any of those risks, so there are controls you put into place in the office around those risks, then you really should have a plan that sort of details that. You want to be able to demonstrate that compliance as well. So I would certainly recommend that plan. It doesn't need to be specifically a return to work plan. It can be anything. It can be a poster. It could be something that you are using in the business to demonstrate what you are doing to manage the risks. So whatever that we think the plan works well, but now you will need something to show that you have actually done the risk assessment and have got relevant controls.
Yep. Okay, I'll keep coming at you with sort of rapid fire questions. So if you have any other questions, please throw them into the Q&A. I have been working from home with 20% reduction in hours to account for the lower cost to myself and others working from home and adjusting when I do my work hours. The employer wants us to be back at work 5 days a week. Can they keep the 20% reduction in hours when I am working, when I am work performing 100% of pre-COVID hours? In other words, they want me back at work working 38 hours a week for 30.4 hours paid. Simon, Shane, either of you? Did they enter into an agreement to vary the salary, or was it a direction? Sorry, I missed that part. Was it a direction to work less hours? It didn't specify. It just said I have been working from home with a 20% reduction in hours.
Okay. Yeah. So there's a few things. I mean, Simon may jump in at the end. There's a few things. So before the directions or JobKeeper directions came into play, a lot of employers got the jump and actually started negotiating or coming to agreements with employees around reduced pay, reduced hours, or a combination of both. So if those agreements had been mutually entered into for a period of time, that they're completely fine, and they may well allow employees under those agreements to work for less pay for a period of time because they've agreed to it. If it's a direction, the direction's been given to work less hours, then obviously any increase in hours will obviously come with increased pay. So I think it really comes down to how that arrangement was first entered into and for what period and what terms it was done.
Yeah, interesting. And Simon, I presume, we've had on previous webinars where a lot of companies did move to a 4-day work week or a 20% pay cut. If that wasn't done in writing, how or it wasn't documented probably fully, any advice on how to bring people back and get them back to full-time and full salary in the best ways?
Yeah, I think yeah. If you just had an informal agreement that people were reducing their hours for a period of time and it was all fairly loose, I guess the best way to kind of get matters back on track would be when you're requiring people to come back to work and increase their hours, that you do that, you know, using a letter, being very kind of specific about what you require. Yeah, I'm not sure there's much more that could be said on that. I think going back to that question that was asked, though, my understanding of kind of reading between the lines is, I think they were concerned about a situation where someone has agreed to work reduced hours, say to drop from 5 days to 4 days, and then now they're being asked to come back to work 5 days again, but still on the reduced pay, which I don't think, you know, an employer and an employee can agree to an employee taking a pay cut if they want to, but there would be no power for an employer to in effect increase someone's hours but keep the pay down sort of unilaterally. The JobKeeper provisions don't allow that either. They just allow you to reduce hours and pay accordingly, but you can't increase hours and reduce pay, if that makes sense.
So yeah, it ratchets up and ratchets down equally. Yeah. Okay. Some other questions here. There's somebody, Vicky is saying that she's in Victoria, that do we need to follow government recommendations regarding return to work? Yes. Were there any recommendations? We can all work remotely with the exception of 2 technicians, but the MD prefers us to be in the office. We have not even started the return to work process yet, but I know there will be plenty of resistance to come back. Now, Shane and Simon, something that I'm, you know, sort of looking at and thinking is going to be an issue, and I've had a few people reach out to me with this issue over the last week or so, is the I guess the stress and anxiety of change and change. You know, it was stressful enough switching to working from home, but now that everyone's really discovered, a lot of people have discovered they really enjoy it. That being asked to transition back to the workplace, it may cause anxiety. And you know, I know even before COVID, when you're on holidays for a couple of weeks, and it was the night before, you know, Sunday night before you had to go back to the office, there's always that feeling of, oh, you know, it's back to work. And I feel like the whole country is kind of feeling that at the moment. What if any special considerations or processes should be followed for dealing with that particular issue? Or do you feel like we've already covered it, Shane?
Oh, look, that's an interesting point. I suppose, I guess the risk is in rushing back into a physical workplace environment very quickly without going through the things we've spoken about, the considerations and the consultation, and actually making sure it's done in a certain way. If you rush back, that certainly does create a number of issues, and you may well be dealing with a number of anxiety issues and stress-related issues in the workplace as a result. So I suppose that the lesson is really just to take a thorough approach to this and make sure you've considered all those points we've gone through. Do it in that sort of way. Consult, because if you then want to start enforcing that, you've at least got that to rely upon, and potentially you will have less issues in regards to those matters. So I suppose that's the observation there, is that the more you do around preparing for it, obviously the less there might be around issues around anxiety, and obviously as well with those workplace stress and workers' compensation claims around stress. It is certainly, you need to be able to demonstrate how well you are managing that as best as possible as a business. So obviously the approach we're taking here, where you go through that, is one way of defending yourself against that as an employer.
And I guess asking for feedback as well, just asking people how they're feeling, and responding according to what they tell you. We have built and launched a survey tool in Employment Hero. I think it includes a standard template for a COVID-19 check-in that asks people how they're feeling, how they're coping. You know, I would suggest that's a good tool to use just to check in with people as you're asking them to transition. There's also the feedback tool in there and the happiness survey, just to take a pulse on how people are feeling generally in the business. So there's plenty of tools there, and I would just say the most important thing is to just, you know, seek to understand how people are feeling and then work with them in the best ways possible to get them back to full productivity if they're not there already. If they are there already, as I said earlier, you know, our approach has been, if people are productive and happy working remotely, then, you know, why wouldn't you embrace it? It has so many benefits for society, people who are isolated, people who are unemployed looking for work, people who are working parents. There's just so many great things about remote work that I really think we should try and sustain it. Any other questions there, Shane, that you can see?
No, look, there's a few questions around around reversing stand downs and getting people back to work. So I suppose that I guess the next point is, if you've got employees that are currently stood down because you haven't been able to provide them any work over the last couple of months and are now considering reopening your doors because restrictions are being loosened, maybe this is the first time you've had to think about JobKeeper directions because they've been fully stood down. So it would be worthwhile refreshing yourself on what a JobKeeper direction can look like if you are a JobKeeper eligible employer, which I imagine if you've had stood down workforce, you'd be in that sort of category. But a JobKeeper direction can then be used around, because you might have fully stood down a worker for this period, a JobKeeper direction can then be used to actually increase the hours of an employee over the next coming months as you ramp back up again. So you can use them that way to get people back into the workforce. You can also use JobKeeper directions to get employees to do different tasks and responsibilities or jobs that were probably outside of their normal job description to enable them to get back to work and to allow the economy to roll again. So yeah, there's a whole heap of stuff on JobKeeper directions that we've covered previously. The resources are all available there. Refresh yourself on that if you're using them for the first time.
Yeah. Okay, just one more question here. Our staff work in schools delivering programs to students. We have some staff who are older, and my concern is about their own health and safety given the risk factor. Can we ask them not to work? Simon?
Yeah, I think I would be guided by medical advice. I think if you have a concern about someone being in a high risk group for contracting COVID, I would consult with them and let them know that you have those concerns. But I would be guided by medical advice that they can get from their own doctor. I certainly wouldn't be taking a blanket policy that that elder people in the workforce we're not going to send into work. I think you need to consult with them and get some sort of medical advice.
Great. Anyone see any other questions that they would like to answer, or anyone have any questions they would like to answer? I'm really intrigued. Somebody said down here, can we answer Gemma's question? Because I had that same question too, but I can't find Gemma's question.
I saw that. I think that was in the chat.
Okay.
It's been a while back. Gemma's just posted again. Sorry. Yep. If employers asked employees to take a pay reduction for 3 months and they have prior to JobKeeper, yet since the employer is eligible for JobKeeper, can the employees decline the continuation of pay reductions if the employer feels they need to continue these to keep the doors open? Okay. So I think what's happened here is that prior to JobKeeper, and there was many employers in this situation, prior to JobKeeper, an agreement was made between employers and employees to vary their pay, obviously to try and keep jobs. Government then introduced JobKeeper. So that changed the game a bit for the employer in regards to what they can do. That was agreed for 3 months. So I guess it still is on the employer whether they want to keep that agreement in place or not, given JobKeeper comes into play or not. They're well within their rights to keep the agreement in place. It really depends on how that agreement was entered into. But if there was a 3-month commitment there that was made by every employee and the employer, they could still see that through. The other part of that question was, yes, that's it. Can the employees decline? Yeah, so that's probably how I'd sort of approach that. It's certainly JobKeeper has changed the game a lot for these businesses. So it's wise to sort of reconsider those arrangements in consideration of JobKeeper, definitely.
Yeah, and there's another question here from Paul Woodcock. Do you have to engage all team members back to full-time at the same time once we're reopened? Opening a restaurant for 20 persons doesn't require all team members to return to full-time. I presume that, Simon, in that case, the JobKeeper directions orders would enable you to direct people to work whatever, different hours than normal. Yeah. But I guess the question is, what happens at the end of September when those directions orders expire and people are still not working full time, if that's the case.
Yeah, I mean, if your hours have been reduced under the JobKeeper directions, then come the end of September, they will cease to have effect. That's how things stand at the moment. Whether the government will extend that, we don't know. But yeah, as things stand, when we get to the end of a JobKeeper payment period, those employees will need to go back to their previous hours. If that is not possible, then employers are going to face some difficult decisions. That might mean coming to an agreement with employees about reducing hours, or potentially, I guess, it could lead to redundancies.
Yep. And I think we might finish up on this one. Can you partially reverse a stand down, meaning some of you with issue? So retail shops open and some stay closed, meaning those closed is on stand down.
Yes, you can. So you go, Simon.
No. After you.
Yeah, so I think we touched on that before. If you've got employees fully stood down, then no, you can. If you are JobKeeper eligible, you can start using those JobKeeper directions to have them return to work or gradually increase their hours as you need them.
Yep. Okay, so look, it's been a bit of a jumbled discussion, but I think we've covered the general necessity to get people back to work. The reality of the situation that on our call here, around 65% of companies are now considering making some of their roles remote, and that means that a huge proportion of the economy are going to be dealing with a blended workforce, and how do they become remote first or blended or office first? A whole bunch of questions there. How do you treat people equally and fairly when people are working in different environments and locations? How do you ensure that you're providing or meeting your obligations as an employer to get people back to a safe working environment, or even keep them working in a safe working environment from home? And then some of these, more specific questions about bringing people back, increasing their hours and wages back to what they were, and the JobKeeper directives and using those over the next few months as we sort of reintegrate everyone back into the workplace. Are there any other topics that you think that we've covered, or that we should summarize, or things we need to maybe follow up with?
There's a lot of questions on here we may not have got to. I will spend some time after the webinar to review some of them. We'll try and get some questions answered either on a blog, follow-up blog, or something similar that we can share with everyone.
And just finalising that poll. So just as before we sign off, we have that question out there was, when do you expect all your staff to be back in the office together? And 57% of people were saying later, a month or so down the track. Yeah, I would agree with that. I can't see all of us being together in one place in the office for at least a month, unfortunately, as much as we would love to. I think we've probably covered it. Simon, thank you for coming on and at short notice. I know how busy you are. We've posted a link in the chat to Simon if you have more questions or you need an exceptionally good employment lawyer who's very down to earth and easy to speak to. You're not going to get anything but an honest and good response from Simon. Please reach out to him. If you need advice from an incredibly experienced HR practitioner, speak to Shane and Employment Innovations. We have posted in the chat also links to all of the resources that Employment Hero has put together. We'll continue to develop those resources and we'll continue to answer those questions that we haven't answered already. We're all in this together. We're doing the best we can to try and support you. If there's more that we can do, we want to know what it is, what you need, and we will continue to do everything we can to help Australia's businesses, employers, and employees get back to work and get to the other side of this crisis. Thank you all for participating. Speak to you soon.
Thanks, everyone. Cheers.
Thank you.
Bye.